Today we're going to be talking about the B-24 Liberator, nicknamed the Flying Boxcar. The B-24 was an American heavy bomber designed by the Consolidated Aircraft Company. It also served in additional roles including anti-submarine warfare and maritime patrol. Each aircraft cost roughly $297,000, equivalent to $4.95 million in today's money, with around 19,250 being built. Five key facts about the B-24. Fact 1. The B-24 holds the record for the most produced bomber, heavy bomber, multi-engined aircraft, and American military aircraft in history. At its peak, one aircraft was being produced every 63 minutes. Fact 2. The B-24 was the first aircraft to cross the Atlantic as a matter of routine. Fact 3. In October 1944, two RAF Liberators were stripped of armament and retrofitted with additional fuel tanks. This allowed them to ferry special forces on 26-hour return flights, such as the route between Jessore and Singapore. Fact 4. US B-24s carried the Azon laterally guided precision munition. This was one of the pioneering Allied radio-guided weapons. It was intended to be used to more precisely target bridges and other large infrastructure. Fact 5. A PB-4Y-1 Liberator was the aircraft modified to be a remote-controlled bomb that exploded in flight and killed the elder brother of future US President John F. Kennedy. The B-24H carried a crew of 11, including pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, nose turret gunner, top turret gunner, two waist gunners, bore turret gunner, and tail gunner. The aircraft weighed 16.5 tons empty and had a maximum takeoff weight of 29.5 tons. Standing 5.5 meters tall, with a wingspan of 33.5 meters and length of 20.5 meters, this aircraft was a truly large airframe, well suited to the heavy bomber role. Power was provided by four Pratt & Whitney R1830-35 or -41 turbo-supercharged radial engines, which provided 1,200 horsepower each. Top speed was 290 miles an hour, and maximum range was superb for the period at 2,100 miles. Maximum altitude was 28,000 feet. The B-24 was the first American bomber to utilize tricycle landing gear, but was difficult to taxi due to differential braking and differential thrust being used for steering. Early models utilized a greenhouse nose with bore-mounted 7.62mm machine guns. However, this left the aircraft vulnerable to head-on attack. This setup was later replaced with a nose turret in the B-24H. This provided better security from frontal attack. The B-24 emerged from a US Army Air Corps request in 1938 for Consolidated to produce the B-17 under license. Consolidated instead submitted a more modern design of its own. It was known as Model 32 and used a David Davis wing with a high-efficiency aerofoil design, coupled with a twin tail from their Model 31 flying boat. A US AAC specification, C212, was resultantly published. This invited designs for a bomber faster, with longer range, and with a higher ceiling than the B-17. It was designed to ensure the B-24 would be the outright winner. Project A, as the development was therefore known, did not meet all of these goals, but it was a true step in the right direction and signalled the start of development of the B-24. The aircraft was operated by an array of nations, predominantly during the Second World War. Most notable were the US Army Air Force, US Navy, and US Marine Corps, along with the RAF and the Royal Australian Air Force. The aircraft was, however, also operated by the Soviet Union and Chinese Nationalist Air Force in much smaller numbers. The Luftwaffe also captured 3 aircraft and utilized them for secret operations, testing and evaluation. Landing gear from captured and crashed B-24s was later used on the prototype German Ju-287 jet bomber in 1945. Qantas in 1944 also began to operate 2 converted aircraft on a route between Perth and Colombo. At the time, this was the longest non-stop air route in the world. Such flights were named Kangaroo, and this was the first time the now infamous Qantas Kangaroo was emblazoned upon an airplane. The US Army Air Force employed the aircraft in both the European and Pacific theatres, and indeed the aircraft would see operations in all theatres in World War II. The long range of this aircraft was imperative to operations within the Pacific. One B-24 was already stationed at Pearl Harbor prior to the attack, but was destroyed by the Japanese, who had preempted its use in reconnaissance missions. Entry to combat came in 1942, when 4 bombers attempted to attack Wake Island, but failed to find it. B-24s were the dominant airframe used for aerial bombardment in this theatre due to them being faster, possessing greater range, and carrying greater bomb loads than the B-17. Strategic bombing was the main role of the B-24 in US AAF service. 15 of the Air Force's 21 bombardment groups flew B-24s. In 1944, they were the major offensive bomber deployed against Germany. Thousands flew from bases in Europe, dropping hundreds of thousands of ordnance. These aircraft were namely deployed in the US daylight bombing raids. This led to huge numbers of losses, both of men and airframes. The 44th Bomb Group, for example, lost 13 of its 27 aircraft in only 5 months. Perhaps the most infamous mission involving the B-24 was the attack by 3 units of such aircraft upon the Ploiești oil fields in Romania, nicknamed Operation Tidal Wave. The mission was a costly success, destroying both of its targets but suffering huge losses of aircraft, with 54 of 177 B-24s destroyed. The US Air Force also utilised B-24s as electronic warfare aircraft, equipped to jam German VHF communications during daylight raids, and also as assembly ships, which were fitted with flares and signal lighting to help the assembly of group formations, particularly at night. B-24s were also used as part of Operation Carpetbagger, with pilots flying specially painted B-24Ds coated in anti-searchlight black paint to support underground forces within German-occupied Europe. This was a mission carried out jointly with the Office of Strategic Services, with spies, known as Joes, and commando groups also carried behind enemy lines prior to D-Day. Over 5,000 officers and enlisted men who had crashed or were captured were retrieved by such missions from behind enemy lines. Such missions used low-level night flying and were incredibly stressful for pilots. Converted B-24s, known as C-87s, were also utilised in transport roles. They carried no weapons and had supercharged engines with large cargo floors. These aircraft were the only aircraft capable of flying loaded over the Himalayas from India to China during the Second World War. The US Navy deployed the type in anti-ship patrols, anti-submarine warfare, and for photographic reconnaissance. Naval B-24s were designated as PBY-4-1, indicating that they were the 4th bomber to be designed and built by the Consolidated Aircraft Company. The PBY-4-1 was highly successful, but a fully navalised variant, the PBY-4-2, which utilised a single vertical tail fin, was ordered and deployed with great success. The RAF also employed the aircraft in a maritime role. Liberators were used to hunt and attack U-boats in the Battle of the Atlantic, often when they were vulnerable on the surface. VLR, or Very Long Range Liberators, saw instant success in this role, helping to close the mid-Atlantic gap threatening the convoys. Anti-surface vessel radar allowed hunting of U-boats by both day and night, with both sides of the Atlantic seeing B-24 operations, Canada and the US from the west, and the RAF aircraft operating from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Iceland. Liberators were credited in full or partially with sinking 93 U-boats, and their introduction, particularly when fully navalised, was highly influential in turning the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. RAF aircraft were also firstly deployed as transatlantic transports between Canada and Scotland, known as LB-30s. Aircraft from the RAF also operated between Britain and Egypt, deviating all the way around mainland Europe. 2 RAF bomber squadrons were deployed to the Middle East in 1942, and 2 more to India in 1944. RAF Liberators were not used over Germany in a bombing role, but were deployed in an electronic warfare role. Royal Australian Air Force Liberators, flying from the Northern Territories, conducted raids against Japan, shipping, and targets within other areas of Asia. They were also employed as part of the force to fly home prisoners of war. They remained in service with the RAAF until 1948. The B-24A was the first production model, including aerodynamic improvements developed from prototype aircraft operation. The XB-24 emerged as this original aircraft failed to reach its projected speed, with Pratt & Whitney R1830-33 radials replaced by R1830-41 turbo-supercharged radials. This ensured 800 more horsepower and improved speed by 37 miles an hour. The B-24C was the production model of the XB-24 and used a new fuselage from the RAF's LB-30. Hydraulically operated 50 caliber machine guns were also added to the tail gunner position, and a dorsal turret was added to the forward fuselage. The B-24D was the first large-scale production model, including a remotely operated belly turret at first, but this was deemed unsatisfactory and production reverted to the former manual turret. This was later replaced by a ball turret. Late B-24Ds saw the inclusion of the cheek guns mounted either side of the forward nose. The B-24E, built by Ford, was a slight adaptation of the B-24D using alternative engines and used primarily as a training aircraft. The B-24G designated aircraft was built by North American Aviation and used 3 50 caliber machine guns in the nose. The B-24G-1 replaced the greenhouse nose with an A6 nose turret. The B-24H addressed head-on vulnerability using an electric A15 nose turret. Tail turrets had larger windows, and the dorsal turret was altered to the high-hat dome design. 3,100 of these aircraft were produced, and many deem them to be the best example of the B-24. The B-24J was highly similar to the B-24H, but shortages of the nose turret forced replacement with an A6 nose turret as seen in the earlier B-24G. It also employed autopilot and improved bomb sights. 6,678 of these aircraft types were produced. The XB-24K was a testbed for the singular tail employed on the navalised PB-4Y2 aircraft type. It proved effective and ensured that this was used. The B-24L was a lighter version of the B-24J, replacing the Sperry ball turret with a floor ring mount, and later aircraft included no tail armament. The B-24M improved on the B-24L, saving even more weight and employing a new lightweight tail turret. This was the last production model, with 2,593 built. Some flew only from the factory to the scrap heap. The transport variant of this aircraft was designated the C-87, and the C-87A was used as a VIP transport. The F-7 was the denotation for the photographic reconnaissance variant, developed from the B-24H. It was adapted further in both the F-7A and F-7B. In naval service, the aircraft was known as both the PB-4Y-1, this was the standard navalised Liberator, with 976 of these aircraft produced. The fully navalised variant of this aircraft, using a single tail fin, was known as the PB-4Y-2 Privateer. The final designation was the BQ-8. This was the remote control flying bomb variant, famed for killing Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. during Operation Anvil. Self-defense armament consisted of 10 50 caliber M2 machine guns spread across the various turrets and waist positions to provide all-around defense. Bomb load was impressive, but highly dependent upon the desired range. Short missions could carry as much as 8,000 pounds, 3.6 tons, but longer missions could only carry around 5,000 pounds, or 2.3 tons. Bombs were held in 2 central bomb bays, which used roller-type bomb bay doors that retracted into the fuselage to ensure minimal drag and maintaining airspeed over the target. These doors were also chosen due to the low ground clearance of the aircraft, which would prevent other types of doors from being able to open when on the ground. The bore turret was also retractable due to ground clearance issues. Despite performing well, the aircraft did have many notable issues. It was hard to taxi and suffered from poor frontal protection. The wings were also particularly fragile, especially when compared to the B-17 Flying Fortress, with many reports indicating they were not resistant to battle damage, noting how the wing could burst into fire or shear off when damaged. Crews eventually nicknamed the aircraft the Flying Coffin, and one B-24J crew nicknamed their aircraft a Tisket, a Tasket, a GI Casket. The aircraft also had the unfortunate issue of often losing all electrical power whilst taking off and landing. Not particularly helpful. The aircraft was comparable to the B-17, Lancaster, and other heavy four-engine bombers of the Second World War, and was eventually superseded by designs such as the B-29. It was quickly phased out of service by both the RAF and the US Air Force, but remained in service for a short time with the US Navy and until 1968 with the Indian Air Force. The B-24 was a bomber that was both modern and effective upon its introduction, superior in many ways to the B-17. However, the technological breakthroughs of bomber design during the war forced the aircraft quickly out of service despite its numerous upgrades. The type performed well in all theatres despite taking heavy losses and played a vital role both in the Atlantic and the Strategic Air Campaign over Germany.